Well, today is Easter, and even though there is some ceasefires around the world, even though there is peace, even though there is good things to think about, tragically, this world is still in turmoil. Today we're going to talk about a few things. One is this picture here. What is that picture right there? What is that of? What's going on in that area? Something very nefarious that we need to talk about. Also, we are going to discuss what's happening in the UK. You know, on Easter, you would think that the promotion of Christian values and Resurrection Sunday and the thought of what Easter really is about. Well, that's not what Keir Starmer had to say. UK is really representing what we're not supposed to be and what we're not supposed to become, even in America. We'll talk about what Keir Starmer just said about Christianity. Also, we'll talk about America. There's a new study that shows that people who have families, people who want bigger families, tend to be more conservative, but also tend to have more morals and values. Something to think about. All of a sudden, you hear South Korea is trying to promote having children. America actually is starting to do a little bit of the same. We'll talk about what America policy just came out from the Transportation Department. Wow, isn't that weird? Also, we're going to talk about our health and how we can fix our health just like that. And then lastly, we're going to discuss where martial law just happened in the world. And sadly, somebody that we're promoting, they just become more of a dictator. Let's dive into these stories on this Easter Sunday. This video starts right now. Hey guys, welcome to the channel today. Thank you so very much for being here. We humbly appreciate you. And most of all, we hope that you took your family to church today. We hope that you are honoring the Easter, the Resurrection Sunday, and actually really talking about what it means. It's not Easter and bunnies and eggs. It's about Christ. So, empty tomb, happy Resurrection Sunday. Now let's talk about the video of today. First, let's talk about this place, this imagery of something that we found. Now, where is that in the world and what does it mean? Satellite images expose Chinese secretive nuclear submarine force. It says newly published satellite imagery shows the latest developments in Chinese naval base, how they are building one of the biggest fleets when it comes to nuclear powered submarines, which is basically technology that we pretty much made and actually capitalized on. It says naval analyst Alex Luck know that Google Earth recently updated satellite imagery to show what and how much China has grown their submarines and also their navy. So you think about that and you're like, okay, well, for the longest we always thought their war has been basically in the Pacific, making sure that the Pacific is taken care of. Well, the more fleet that they're building, the more submarines they're building with nuclear technology, what that means is actually they can go further without having to come up to the surface. They can go further without being exposed. That's a pretty big deal. I doubt they're worried about those submarines just going right around the Pacific, right around them, huh? It's all about what they're propagating across the world. So something we should pay attention to, because it says that during this negotiation talks of trade tariffs and all that going on, there's a lot more basically under the surface. And what they're talking about is the fact that their technology with AI, their technology with nuclear submarines, their technology with growing their fleet, they're growing their fleet at 10 times the rate, the Navy, than what we're growing our fleet. Remember, the Navy is actually how America has thrived for so long, is the way that we've controlled the seas. That's why the Panama Canal is important. That's why nuclear capabilities on submarines is important. Now they're saying China has come up to catch us and actually surpassed us in some technology. This is what scares me, is the more you hear about this kind of stuff happening, the more you hear about Palantir, Anduril, and all these companies that are more AI tech-driven companies. That I'm not necessarily against us using technology again, just like this. This is how we found this, was through technology. But the more that we can use surveillance and see what our enemies are doing, right now they're our enemies. But before long, who else will be our enemies? Will we be our own enemy? Will that same technology be used on us? So what scares me is the fact that not only do we see adversaries getting this capabilities to catch up with us, the more that we see AI technology coming alongside that, the more we're going to see more surveillance on us as Americans, but also on other people of the world. To me, that's even worse, because to me, what that's showing is who actually has privacy and freedom when technology could see us literally sitting here on this camera from space. That's intense, because that's how we found this technology. That's how we saw what they were doing, was through other forms of satellite surveillance. The question is, that seems like we are getting good knowledge and we're understanding what our adversary is doing, but what happens when we become the adversaries of other people, even our own government? So we have to watch this and pay attention. Yes, we need to pay attention to China, but what this shows to me is the danger of surveillance and who actually becomes the one surveilled upon. I think that's why we have to be very careful of cyber attacks. That's why we got to be careful of our virtual reality and our digital footprint, because I think what we're doing is actually putting ourselves in a very, very tough, precarious spot, because what we're seeing is we keep trying to outdo each other. Well, the more we outdo each other, the more I believe both groups of people, the people of America, the people of China, will be vulnerable. Pay attention to that story. Now let's move on to Europe. Europe, you know, I keep saying Europe is falling, and I hope America doesn't follow that same pathway. And I think Trump helped us, because Trump came out and he gave a great Easter message the other day. He was not doing a day of visibility like Biden was doing last year. But he came out and said that he was going to honor Christ, the Resurrection Sunday. Easter is about the risen Christ. Like, that is great terminology. I hope that they don't just talk about it, I hope they walk it. But I want you to listen to what Keir Starmer said this week during Easter. During Easter, this is what was on his mind. He came out and applauded the fact that they have proudly taken 400 British citizens and had them arrested for making social media posts critical of the Islamic faith. Now, this same government has harmed the Christian movement, because Christians can't hand out leaflets. Islam can. Christians can't make posts about other faiths. Islam can. We're starting to see different governments in UK completely embrace more of a Sharia law, whereas once before they were embracing Christian views and values. Now, the problem is this. When we start seeing that happen, what happens is turmoil happens. There's no assimilation, and we start seeing a nation falling. It says their goal is to clean up their social media and to make sure that people are not hating. Now that sounds good on the surface. Like, there was another guy that went viral saying, look, we don't want you having profane language and cursing out in the public. That could be a good thing. I mean, trust me, I don't like people being profane in public. But the problem is this. They're using that way of thinking to say, okay, you don't really have freedom of expression when it comes to your phone. You don't have freedom of expression when it comes to social media. And they're not actually retaliating against certain people. They're only retaliating against Christians, against people who push for freedom, people who support America. Those are the things that they're arresting people for. Now, what does that mean? That means we're seeing more of a martial law state. Now, that goes right along with what Ukraine just did. Now, Russia and Ukraine came to a peace for Easter. Now, Russia actually brought it up. Zelensky was against it. And then he felt pressure across the world because of all the religious ties to Easter. So all of a sudden he said, okay, we'll do peace, but I don't trust Putin. Now, this is coming from the same man who just extended his rule at least till August, to where they're not going to have any elections, not going to have any form of any freedom. He actually literally came out and stated that he will have martial law go throughout August. Now, are we actually looking at someone that wants freedom for people? Now, he came out, and actually after he had felt pressure from Russia, but also the rest of the world, he came out and said, of course, we're going to celebrate Easter and Christ is risen. And that's great. I love to hear that. But I don't want to just hear that talk. I don't want to hear our leaders say that Christ is risen. I don't want to hear that Easter is about Christ and the empty tomb. I want them to live that out each and every day. What's funny, both Russia and Ukraine say that, and then they go back to war. I mean, I'm glad they're bringing peace for at least one day, but come on. I mean, we need more than just talking about it. We need that true walk. Now, at the same time, in the Middle East, bombings in churches happening on Easter and during Easter festivities. And again, we talk about having bad leadership. I mean, think about this. We took out what we considered bad people, like in Syria, in Lebanon, in Libya, and all those places. But now you're actually seeing more Christian persecution in those areas. Isn't that amazing? So while we hope for peace and prosperity, while we hope for people to honor Easter, what we're actually seeing is still persecution in places like UK, still persecution in places like Ukraine, still persecution in the Middle East. Now that brings me to another story about America. Listen to what the Transportation Secretary was just talking about in a new study that came out. Having babies means you may have more money coming to your state. Having babies brings peace and prosperity. Listen to the story. It says America's not having enough babies, and so the government's kind of freaking out. So now states are wanting to make more babies. So what are they doing? They're getting their cash out, their credits out, and making sure that they're providing for the states that need it most. It says states, if you don't have the babies, you're not going to have the sidewalks and strollers. And it quipped because it says South Dakota is basically a baby factory of the U.S., meaning it's having more babies per capita than any other state. And it says, therefore, what we're seeing is we're wanting to keep pushing funds to those places because ultimately they're going to need more infrastructure as their population booms. They said there's places like South Korea that are literally trying to give tax credits and tax incentives and money and time off and vacation for people who want to extend their families because they realize the fall of a civilization is when we're not procreating. And so it's amazing how what we see with the Transportation Department, he was saying, look, I want to see more infrastructure go to these states because we believe we're going to have a population boom. Our Transportation Secretary has 9 children himself, which is a phenomenal thing. And so that leads right to another story. It says that if people had more children, what they realized is when people have more kids and the father is in the home and a father wants to be part of their lives, we see him being a better leader of his home. We see him being a better husband and father, and that tends to make them be more traditional when it comes to their thoughts of faith, freedom, and happiness. It says that those people don't tend to want war across the world. They tend to want peace. They tend to be a warrior at home. They tend to want their communities better. So now the promotion of having babies actually could bring true peace to America, because what they're seeing is more conservatism coming out because their children are involved. He says they're seeing more of they want to be home and not work abroad. And it says they're wanting their education systems and their communities to be better. So safe streets and either better public education, private education, or homeschool. So the studies show that the more children that we're having in our nation, actually the more conservative and traditional we become. What that represents is 2 things. Look at what has happened with South Korea and UK. Both have stopped having a lot of children. Both of those areas went more liberal and more away from their faith and values. Now, one group of people that it's not affecting is Muslims. Muslims are having a ton of children, and it says their goal is to spread their faith through procreation. Now, the kicker is this. When are we going to wake up and realize that in Christianity? That family is a good thing, and that's actually the first form of government and the first form of head of household, the first form of really true guidance was from the family. And what the Transportation Secretary was kind of talking about, and also what these studies show, is that when people start having children, they tend to be more conservative, but they tend to be more traditional, and they tend to be better citizens in their own states. They tend to want the best. Why? Because they're raising children there. You know, if you were raising children in a very bad area, you would want the very best, so therefore you either move or you try to make your home better. And it said that's what actually needs to happen, is people need to have more babies. The only group of people that Trump lost handily with, and still loses out with, is when moms are raising babies on their own and the father's not in the home, or single women who don't have children. Every other group of people, it went up in the conservative movement. It went up with traditional views, and it went up with the support of Trump. Does that mean Trump's the leader of everything? No. What that means is people are wanting faith, freedom to shine out. And that's really our only hope in America. If we really want a new mission in life, it should be wanting to see our families get stronger. When families get stronger, our nation gets stronger. And that's proved by like what we just talked about with UK and South Korea. Also, when nations tended to pull away from family views, traditional values, they tended to fall. Think of empires like the Roman Empire. Think of empires like the Grecian Empire. When they took the breakdown of the family and they started promoting different things, then the fall of their empires really started happening. Now, one more story that goes along with that, and I want to hit a home on it because it ties into making better families, making better situations for people to grow up in. It says, investigative journalist Nina Teixos says, if you implement a better diet, then men get stronger, type 2 diabetes goes down, reverse hypertension, reduce depression, and anxiety goes down by 80%. not within years, but within weeks. There was a study done with type 2 diabetics and also people that had major health problems. And when they started cleaning up their diet and getting them better on holistic food and nutrient-dense food, men became more strong, people got off medicines, and people's diets got better and their health improved overall. So, Colby, what does food and UK and having babies, all that have to do with on Easter? Well, actually, here's what it has to do with. When we start spiritually being better, when we start being better fathers and mothers and having better situations at home, start leading our families like they're supposed to, and then all of a sudden we start realizing that we can have better health by just providing better food, what that represents is that's the way it's always been done in history. When our spiritual house was in order, when our family's house was in order, when we physically were in the homes being better fathers and mothers and raising our children together, and when we started actually raising good quality food or eating good quality food, it seems like everything goes better for a country and for people in general. Less health problems, more stable homes, and again, a spiritual outlook. That's what the world is lacking more than anything. They said the more that we try to implement more food, what we're doing is we're doing trash food and the nutrients are leaving. They're not nutrient dense anymore. The more that we hybridize our seed, the more that we mutate our seed, we're producing food, but the nutrients are not there. And therefore, people are getting weaker, men are getting weaker, people are getting more sicker, and ultimately, the breakdown of our bodies are happening. Look at social policies and look at the way that these cities are being ran. The more that we give money to people and we try to promote non-marriage, we try to promote single families, we try to not actually want to see a father and mother at home. If we started promoting true father-mother homes again and husband and wife and having good marriages, kind of like what South Korea is now trying to do, is trying to say, look, you've got to start having kids or we're going to lose our civilization. The more that we started promoting the family, I think the better our communities would get, because people would have a drive for better safety, more peace, and better education overall. There would be more stabilization at home. And then ultimately, when we realize how lost we are without our faith, then I think we wake up and start seeing that once we turn back to God, and it shows in history when nations turned to faith in values and morals, they became better. When they turned away from faith, they've gotten weaker and they went to their demise. What America needs to learn from places like South Korea is, yes, have more babies. What America needs to learn from places like UK is that we see how Islam is growing and how it's taking over, and now we have leadership in what we consider a Christian nation in the West, with the UK now arresting Christians and persecuting. What we see in the Middle East is now we're seeing more persecution of Christians. What we see is the talking of in Eastern European countries like Ukraine and Russia, and how they're wanting peace just on this one day because Christ is Lord. Well, that's true, but we should want peace overall. Let's go back to what that study said. When men and women raise families and they raise it in a faith-driven household, they become more conservative, they become better peacekeepers, and they become better community leaders. If we really want America to thrive, it starts back at our homes. It starts back in our faith, father and mothers raising their children together, and it actually starts back with a better marriage and, lastly, better food. When we have better food, it makes men be stronger, it makes us be less sick, and to me, what it helps us is realize independence and sustainability with good quality foods. So as we're ending this video on Easter, first of all, make sure your faith is grounded, and make sure your faith is put in things that matter, like what Easter actually stands for, Resurrection Sunday. When we have faith and values, our countries tend to do better. Our families tend to do better. Our communities do better. Secondly, if we are wanting to be true leaders, we should want to make sure that we're being the best husband or wife and the best father and mother that we can be for our family. Stabilize our homes better. Physically, financially, mentally, emotionally, we need to be better. And when that takes place, then we realize that we need to do things better. We need to raise our own food. We need to be smarter with money. We need to understand the severity of the situations that we're putting ourselves in. I believe we become more wiser because we're looking out for children. We're looking out for spouses. We're not looking out for selfish ambitions. So we tend to become more traditional. We tend to become more values and morals oriented because we're raising families. My goal for you today is to see some of the mistakes that some areas are making, and let's try not to make them. Let's let America be the city on a hill that it once was. And we need to see revival. And that starts back at our homes. That starts back with our diets. That starts back with putting Christ first. Guys, thank you so much for watching. We hope that you enjoy this video. It's just a simple message, but it's so threadbare and true. When we have good faith, morals, and values, when we try to be the best father and mother and husband and wife we can be, and when we try to have sustainability and independence with our food and with our money, everything tends to work out better. Thank you for watching. God bless.